Livable Streets. When we were founded, we started socials to bring people together to talk about rethinking urban transportation. We started having speakers come and give talks, which launched our Street Talk series. We hosted dozens, and the popularity grew and grew. And many of you might remember when we hosted them in our office, and we were all sitting on top of each other and on the floor and huddled up closely. And they got so popular that we said, well, why don't we have 10 Street Talks in one night? And then that became so popular, and we outgrew our office, we outgrew a space at MIT, we came here to our new home at Central Square Theater, and then thank you for your patience, but it sold out, which is amazing, but yesterday, and we received so many more inquiries today, and they've just been growing and growing. And they're special because they're a time where our community comes together to meet and to talk, to discuss important issues, to hear visions of what's possible, to hear solutions to some of our most pressing mobility issues around the region and abroad, and for most importantly, the dynamic of the type of people who are in the room. When I look around, we have community members, we have people from the city, we have people who are in school, and designers and planners, and of all walks of life, of all backgrounds, and all ages, and it's really exciting to see. So thank you for coming tonight. Speaking of 10, Livable Streets is going to be celebrating our 10-year anniversary next year in 2015. Just exciting. So stay tuned and stay involved and look out for more announcements about exciting things happening in 2015. And backed by popular demand, we'll have more events like these. I want to thank quickly our sponsors for this evening, On the Move and Bridge. On the Move is a coalition of community-based groups working for transportation justice. And later this evening, you're going to hear from Kevin Odell from that group. And Livable Streets is also a member of On the Move. And one of our other sponsors, our newest sponsor, is Bridge. And Bridge is the world's first smart mass transit system that uses big data and network optimization to develop direct transit routes within a city to cut trips in half without a car. And later you'll also be hearing from Matt George, the CEO of Bridge, who will be talking about it later this evening. It's interesting, right? We're bringing all these different people together, community groups, we have Bridge, we have people from the city. So tonight is definitely going to be a very dynamic evening, and I want to thank the rest of our sponsors for coming tonight to give a talk. And hopefully you're going to all be wowed, and they're going to inspire lots of conversations and discussions to come in the coming years, because there are a lot of hot debates happening right now. I want to finish up by saying thank you to Central Square Theater for this venue. Woo-woo. I want to thank CCTV, which is right in front of me. They are filming this event. It's going to be aired live many times on TV, and it'll also be available to watch online afterwards. So do note that everything is being video recorded. I want to thank you to all of our volunteers. You met them at the door, you will meet them throughout the evening, and they're also behind the scenes making all this possible. So big round of applause for our volunteers. And lastly, I want to thank Shannon Garber, who's right in the back there, who coordinated this event to truly make it possible. And so thank you, Shannon, for making this possible. Woohoo! So without further ado, let's get started. Our first speaker is Alice Brown. And Alice works at the Boston Transportation Department, and she's a project manager for Go Boston 2030. Go Boston 2030 is the city's mobility action plan, which you'll hear a lot more about tonight. Prior to working on this project, she worked at Sasaki Associates and for the Boston Bikes program, and she's also worked with Livable Streets on our Greenway Links initiative. And fun fact, she has at least 7 ways to get to work. So welcome, Alice, and you will hear her talk tonight about Go Boston 2030, imagining our transportation future.
I'm on script tonight. And side note, you guys have one of these on your cards. It's not because you get to talk to the presenters later and ask them questions. This is for me. At some point tonight, I'm going to give you lots of directions for what to do with this. At some point tonight, write a question down and then come find me at the end. So, Go Boston 2030, as Jackie mentioned, is the city's mobility action plan. Last winter, as Mayor Walsh's transition teams met, the Transportation Infrastructure team concluded that it was time for the city to launch a new citywide transportation master plan and urban mobility visioning process. And this spring, the Boston Transportation Department responded to that call. The mission of this planning process is to envision Boston's long-term transportation future through transformative policies and projects and an inclusive public engagement process. And I want to highlight two key words for you to keep in mind throughout this presentation: transformative and inclusive. To be transformative, this plan begins from the premise that it's about people and how they get around. The Transportation Department wants to ensure that 15 years in the future, the city has supported significant improvements in equity, providing everyone in the city with access to opportunities to be healthy, enriched, educated, and employed. In climate, limiting the city's contribution to greenhouse gas emissions and preparing the city for the impacts of sea level rise and other climate change effects. And finally, economy. We want to ensure that the city remains a vibrant job center, a leader in innovation as new sectors emerge, and a place where businesses locate confidently, knowing they'll be well connected to Boston's dynamic workforce. To be inclusive, we begin with the framework of our team. This plan is not going to be crafted in a little office by me. It's going to be crafted with a bunch of people. BTD is guided by a 22-member advisory committee appointed by the mayor, consisting of accomplished professionals, advocates, and neighborhood residents. We're working in direct collaboration with numerous other departments and the mayor's office to coordinate our planning efforts, and we're also working closely with the state and the MBTA. Our daily work is with an ultra-bright team of expert consultants, the Interaction Institute for Social Change, our experts in community involvement, Nelson Nygaard as our transportation gurus, the Dukakis Center at Northeastern, Stephanie's here in the audience, and others are helping us to look at data, and UTL is helping us with branding and visual identity. But how do you reach everyone? Inclusive means more than just the people I described before. It means connecting with as many residents, workers, and visitors as we can in order to develop a shared vision for the future of Boston's mobility. There are many ways that people have been asked to participate in planning processes in the past. BTD is determined to reach farther and include more voices than previous planning efforts. And to do this, we're using a series of new tools, beginning with the question campaign, the card. The question campaign asks people to donate their question about getting around Boston in the future. But before you write a question on your question card, let me tell you a little bit more about how the campaign works and challenge you to use what you hear tonight to shape the city of 2030. We had a soft launch to beta test this fall. We have question ads like this one that ask people to think about a different city, like how we'll get around when our city is underwater. We took an ad like this to Blue Hill Avenue with Circle the City took place in September, and we gathered questions. Lots of people had questions about transit, and some people had questions about safety, equity, and the core functions of transportation. We put everyone's questions up on a clothesline so that people could learn about the things that mattered to other people. And to date, we've gathered 500 questions. But with a full launch in January, we plan to collect thousands. As you begin to think about your question, I want you to start by thinking back 15 years to 1999. This is how I got around in 1999. And lest you've forgotten how some things have changed in Boston, I'm going to do a quick, non-comprehensive selection in not quite chronological order. So here goes. In '99, you printed MapQuest directions when you wanted to drive somewhere. Then you got a GPS for your car that told you how your car could get places, and now your phone tells you how to get around. Your train, by bike, by walking. It's a lot different. We had tokens here in Boston in 1999. Now you probably use your Charlie card, or you're stuck with a Charlie ticket. Please invest in a Charlie card. The Central Artery Tunnel still existed, and there were holes in the ground underneath it, and now there are parks. Since then, Zipcar and Hubway have taught us that we can share cars and bikes. The Silver Line can take you to the airport in Dudley Square. Bike lanes, sharrows, and bike boxes appeared on our street. That's just in the last 7 years. The East Boston Greenway and other paths connect to new places. Your phone tells you when your bus arrives. You can tweet at the MBTA. And you know when the next train is coming. The Complete Streets design guidelines have raised the bar for street design. Parking spots have become parklets in Alston, Brighton, and Roslindale. We close streets like Blue Hill Avenue to cars on Sundays so kids can play in them. Uber and Lyft let us summon taxis in new ways. You can get apps to find and reserve parking, and Bridge lets you change what a bus can be. So, you might have a different question now. Let me ask you, what's your question about getting around Boston in the future? Don't imagine a future that's just like today. Don't tell us something we've already got in the works. This is your chance to imagine what transportation could be like in 15 years. So listen carefully to tonight's presentations and then ask your question. However, you might have a question after tonight. So, we have a whole question campaign process coming in January. Each week there's going to be new ways to ask a question. So we'll have a website that goes live the first week of January. The next week you'll start getting emails from organizations like Livable Streets. You'll start seeing advertisements around the city, and then by the end of January, our partners will help us host events around the city, and we'll be out on the streets with a secret question truck. The other question is how all those questions become a vision. We're going to take the questions, and on the back end, rather than just tagging the words, we're going to be tagging themes like affordability, reliability, safety, to try to understand what people are really asking for in those questions. We're going to prioritize questions that highlight each of these key issues. We're going to edit and finalize those themes, bring you together for some visioning forums, and then come up with a final vision with goals and targets. But even the vision report isn't the end of things. We're going to be using more public input to have a discrete list of long-term projects and policies to guide our work moving forward. We'll develop network plans for different modes and announce early action projects, as well as a mobility lab for testing transportation ideas. By spring 2016, a final action plan will be released. So stay tuned, stay involved, and if you want to get in touch with me, there's my email. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alice. Quick note for everyone, Livable Streets has been a member of the advisory group, and so we were excited to be able to bring them to this event, and you guys see what's going on and get a sneak peek about what's to come, and you'll definitely hear more about it from us in January. So next, we have Chief John Barros and Kris Carter. John Barros was appointed Chief of Economic Development by Boston Mayor Marty Walsh in February of this year. Before his appointment, John served 13 years as Executive Director of the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative. And John has been a member of the Boston School Committee, the Aspen Institute's Roundtable on Community Change, and co-chairperson of the Center for Community Builders. More fun facts are that John is a member of the 2005 Fellows class in the South African... There's a lot more I could say about it. 2005 Fellows class in the South African United States Center for Leadership and Public Values. I thought that was really interesting and fun fact. And in 2007 was named a Barr Foundation Fellow. Now on to Kris. Kris is the Director of Programs.
You just took up our 7 minutes.
Yeah. And if they go over 7 minutes, by the way, music is going to start to play, and it's going to start to get louder and louder and louder. So we are keeping everyone to time. Soon they're going to start playing for me. Kris served, he's the Director of Programs for the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics. He has served as Mayoral Advisor on Transportation and the Innovation Economy for the past 2 administrations. A fun fact about him is he has received recognition from the American Planning Association and multiple film festivals for work that brings together storytelling and urban planning, and some of you probably recognize him from films he's both created for Livable Streets and about the community. So without further ado, I welcome John and Kris, who are going to talk about economics, mobility, and stroopwafels.
Thank you, Jackie. It's exciting to be here. You heard about Boston's plan, Go Boston 2030. And so at the end of September, the mayor sent Kris, Rick Domino from A Better City, and the Chief of Civic Engineering from the Boston Public Works Department, Bill Egan, thank you, to Amsterdam to go learn about their biking system. And what you see behind me is Kris and I cycling on a rainy day, and Kris photobombing while I was trying to record the trip.
I know John's face is so serious in that photo too. So I'm going to walk us through a little bit about where we went, some of the infrastructure. We traveled to Utrecht, which is mostly a university town. It's also a central transportation hub in the Netherlands. We went then to Zwolle, which is a smaller town, about 125,000 people, recognized in 2014 as the Dutch Cycling City of the Year. Then we went to Rotterdam, which maps maybe closer to what Boston is, a city that was sort of obliterated towards the end of World War II, and then regrew as sort of an American-looking city, right? So bigger streets, bigger buildings. And then lastly, Amsterdam, where they legalized pot and put everybody on bikes. So we're going to talk about three things. First, I'm going to talk about infrastructure. John's going to talk about economics a little bit, and then we'll both sort of touch on cycling culture and what it means to have a strong cycling culture. So the first thing to notice is the street color, right? So all the streets that are made and designed for bicycles are red. This was sort of a shock, I think, for all of us. You know, I travel a little bit in Europe, but hadn't really paid attention to this before. But the more important thing that I actually like in this photo is the sign that shows the bicycle in the car, which essentially translates to the car is a guest. So I picture this as being downtown crossing, essentially, right? The car is sort of a guest in that space, except this was the entire city. So some of the stuff that we saw were sort of these old streets, you know, with these closed off sort of pedestrian and cycling downtown areas that allow you to ride side by side. We saw streets where the car sort of has one lane and bikes have two, and they sort of navigate around each other. Neighborhood streets where the car is sort of sort of secondary and moving through at very slow speeds. These sort of neighborhood welcome mats that we called them, the raised crossings, and then sort of your more traditional protected lanes, both one-way and two-way protected cycle tracks. This is something that I found fascinating, not just that there's the bicycle signal head, which probably a lot of you have seen before, but they're actually telling people how long until that signal changes. And then lastly, an example of a roundabout, right? But a more complicated and bicycle priority roundabout that was sort of fascinating to watch. So I realized that was a quick download of all the infrastructure. All of you hopefully know that stuff already. But what it means is there's actually a clear hierarchy of how these roads are laid out. And sure, we have this in the US too. We have this spelled out, you know, somewhat in the Boston Complete Streets Guidelines and AASHTO. But the difference here is that they were often designing roadways with a specific mode in mind, or potentially one or two modes. So we're not trying to fit every single mode on every single street. They would say, here's the bike network, and here's how it maps to the car network, and here's how it maps to the truck network, and here's the transit network. And they would select two of those modes to prioritize. And in the downtown area, almost exclusively that was a transit mode and a bicycle or pedestrian mode, right? So the cars are sort of sent to the outskirts, and the trucks are a little further out from that. I'm going to pitch it back over to my colleague here.
Thank you. Economic development. Biking is also about what it means to the economy, and we looked at it a number of different ways. This is a cost-benefit analysis that was done by an organization called Decisio, and what they did here is look at the question of cost to safety benefits, right? And if you've done this before, there's a value to life, right? And in this case, life is valued at $9.2 million. And then you look at, and there are numbers that go into that, and they look at what it would take, or how much, do our investments matter ratio-wise to the cost of life, right? And then how much more safety do we have, or how safer is that intersection or that street? This happened to be an intersection. And what it would cost society if we lost that life, right? There's a number of things that go in there. So really fascinating cost-benefit analysis. We need to do more of this. There's also benefits to small businesses, right? And so clearly small businesses do better when there's better biking, walking infrastructure, and people spend more money in small businesses. All types of reports show this. They were showing it there. People stop when they are either walking or cycling more than they do when they are in cars. A report in New York showed, in fact, that the spending by mode of transportation was dramatically different. And so for those who can't see, that top line, walk, $20,000 versus on bus, where you're only spending on average $400. And so in between that, you have subway, $16,000, bikes, $16,000, cars, $2,000. Well, this is bus, public bus, almost $2,000, taxi, $720, and then select bus service at $400, almost for $500. Dramatic difference. There was in the same study, we looked at what it meant to have the right infrastructure. So those businesses that had the right infrastructure around the protected bike lanes saw a dramatic increase in sales for those who were riding bikes over those who did not, right? So there is a difference between painting a lane versus a protected cycle track, right? And there's some money differences there for businesses, and it's a good investment. Last point on this is huge impact on their transit system. More people were using transit or using their railways, their trains, when they were able to use bikes to get to them, right? So on our train systems, they go to point A to point B, not very flexible. But when you add cycling, when you add biking infrastructure, parking, and the ease of bike share, et cetera, more people use the train. And they saw a direct correlation between the use of their public infrastructure, public transit infrastructure, to the use of bikes. So that first mile, last mile piece, right? Where you have real flexibility to where you need to go because bicycles were available. So on this learning tour, whenever we would go from city to city, we would do first mile, last mile. We would start on bikes, take trains, get off, grab a bike, and go where we need to go to. And it was really easy to move around the Netherlands in that way. I'm going to start here with the cycle of the culture of cycling. So you see here a picture on your left where a small child was on a bike with her, I'm assuming her mother. And people got around that way all the time. And there are other pictures where there were 2 or 3 child bikes or, in a wheelbarrow kind of a configuration. One in the front, the other one in the back. I saw a father, I have a picture of a father with that child couldn't be more than maybe 4 months old, right? And he's going to work with another child on his back really early morning. The elder on bikes, getting around town. There were families on separate bikes moving around town. I mean, there was a real culture, long history of cycling in the Netherlands. Oh, here's the wheelbarrow, and making sure that we document all of it. So people were getting to work. This was about ease of access, and all of the cycles, all of the bikes looked almost the same, right? So there was no sense of class around bikes. It really was a sense of this is what everybody does to get around. The right kind of culture. Youth mobility, critical. Young people getting from program to program. Really, the music is starting. Kris, all yours.
This is great because I have videos and I didn't put a soundtrack to them, so this is perfect. So I love this intersection because you have 4 trains, hundreds of cyclists, hundreds of pedestrians, over 150 cars. This is 10 minutes. My wife doesn't let me do this when we travel, but I just stood there for 10 minutes. There's no traffic signal at this intersection, right? So what does that say about the culture? I know the Parks Commissioner isn't here tonight, but they actually use the parks as a transportation system in this country instead of banning them from bikes. This piece I love because there's people that were actually getting off tuxedos on bikes and going into a gala. This is a very famous building, but they integrate bikes into the architecture, right? So how can we sort of play with that in our emerging districts? And what does that all lead to? It leads to a more vibrant street scene, right? So this is where you can enjoy your coffee, but there's transit, there's bikes, there's all of the above. I know this is going to be incredibly depressing because we don't have this, so I wanted to leave you with this thought. They have not solved parking in bike lanes yet, right? So we still have hope that we could be the people to solve that issue. And with that, take it away, guys.
As we were preparing all the presentations, we're like, oh no, is that another, is there noise with the video? And like, oh, there's not, okay, let's make things less complicated with technology. And then look at the band that got to play. Awesome, love it. Thank you, John and Kris. Really exciting to see inspiration coming from elsewhere and seeing a change in dialogue from not just saying, oh, they're kind of, that's Netherlands, they're Europe, it's different, but there's actually, they've gone through a lot of transformations and there's a lot to learn and bring back to here. So great, and thank you so much. Next up is Nathan Peyton. Can anyone hear me? Okay. He works at the Barr Foundation, and he supports grant making and manages special projects and programs for the climate team, particularly around transportation and smart growth. Fun fact, Nathan is also a delegate to the South Shore Coalition and serves as an elected member of the planning board for the town of Hull, Mass. And he is here tonight to talk about cold standard bus rapid transit in Metro Boston. So Nathan, I'll let you take it away. Thank you.
All right, I am so excited to start this tonight, and I'm so excited that Jackie mentioned learning from other cities, because that's a lot of what we've been doing with bus rapid transit here. So I work for the Barr Foundation, specifically for the climate team, and one of the Barr Foundation's mission is to reduce greenhouse gases, particularly in the transportation sector, and one of the ways we invest in that is by supporting investment in the public transit system and improvements to the public transit system. Specifically tonight, I'm here to talk about bus rapid transit. Can you all hear me? I want to make sure. Okay, great. Yeah, it's really weird. Okay, so what is bus rapid transit? The letters stand for, I'm sorry, what is BRT? I was supposed to say that. Anyway. So, bus rapid transit. I like to think of it a little more like better rapid transit, though. When we're talking about it, I really think about the user experience, and I think a lot of the people that have been working on this for the last year think about it as well. So we look at beautiful, well-lit, covered stations that keep people warm in the winter and dry when it's raining and cool in the summer. Also, just beautifully designed. Level boarding, really important because not only does it help people get on and off the system quickly, but it allows people with wheelchairs or using a cane or a stroller to get in quickly and off as well. Off-board fare collection, no more rumbling for that bent up dollar and being stuck behind someone like 20 in the cold, 20 people deep. You don't have to be that guy. I was that guy last week. Lost my T-pass. Median alignment. This infrastructure actually is in the middle of the street, and is separated by more than just a paint line on the roadway. This separates not just the buses, allowing them to move quickly through the system and having a huge gains in efficiency there, but also keeps the cars from being stuck behind the bus, which is a huge frustration for drivers as well. Okay, there's also, we work with ITDP, which is the Institute for Transportation Development Policy, and they've instituted something called the gold standard, that's silver and bronze, and that brings the full infrastructure through downtown, meaning one seat, one ride. You're going from where you start your destination all the way to downtown, not just a system that delivers you to the train. Left turns prohibited, helps move things along more quickly, really high quality stations, real-time passenger info. All right, multi-vehicles with really wide doors, and many of them, allowing people to get on and off quickly. Bicycle parking at stations, really integrating the network, as well as including bicycle lanes whenever possible. And center stations that are shared in both directions. That means less infrastructure. Instead of having a station on either side of the street, you have a single piece of infrastructure, which keeps the cost down, but also allows for greater efficiency. So, is gold standard BRT possible in Greater Boston? After a year of looking at this, the BRT study group, which I'm happy to talk about later, but I only have 7 minutes, Jackie. Thanks. Has identified 5 corridors. Those corridors are Dudley Square to Haymarket, Dudley Square to Harvard, Reedville to Forest Hills, Mattapan Square to Dudley Square, and Sullivan Square to Longwood. It's starting to look like a network there. I'm going to pass that one along because there are a few things that I really want to make sure you remember tonight. BRT, bus rapid transit, improves mobility. You can have just as many riders on a BRT system as you do on a metro station system. So Mexico City, for example, BRT system, many more times the ridership of the entire MBTA system. Time's on our side. We've also done an analysis. Our ITDP has completed an analysis with the study group that shows that each one of these corridors produces a significant time savings. BRT saves time and money. It's cost effective. You could build more BRT per dollar than you can any of these other systems. And that's that. I'm hoping that you're going to stay in touch with us on this one. Jackie and LivableStreets Alliance is working on this project, and we want you to stay tuned to what's coming up next, and hopefully we'll be able to get all of you engaged as well.
So as Nathan mentioned, Livable Streets has been a member of the Bus Rapid Transit Study Group for over a year. Some of you, we collect zip codes because we do targeted outreach around specific projects. And so if we have your zip code around a couple of those corridors, you may have heard from us earlier this fall asking you some questions about buses and giving you more information, and we'll be doing a lot more of that in the new year. So stay tuned or definitely get in touch to get involved as well. Next up is Kevin Odell. You're on deck. Kevin is On the Move Coalition Coordinator. You heard about On the Move a little bit earlier because they are a sponsor of this evening. Kevin brings over 17 years of political advocacy, grant writing, policy development, and grassroots organizing experience to On the Move in Boston. Most recently, he helped co-found 2 nonprofit organizations in Portland, Oregon. One is Opal, Organizing People, Activating Leaders, and also Groundwork Portland in 2005. And a fun fact, Odell also co-founded a nonprofit organization in Chapel Hill, North Carolina on local microbreweries concerned with market access and state regulations. So without further ado, please welcome Kevin, presenting on University Pass as a tool for transportation equity.
Thanks. I think this is I think I've been to every one of these 10-on-1s, right? I think we've sponsored every one, so I'm definitely happy to be here again. I'm glad that Jackie mentioned that beer is important to me. So if you do know me, you know that's important. But I am here to talk about the University Pass today. So I do want to preface this by saying I have 4 slides. 4, so less is more. I'm going to try to take as much as I can out of each slide. There we go. So this is the first slide. So if you don't know, last Thursday, the MBTA basically approved a joint pilot program for both a youth pass and a university pass that's going to be implemented in July 2015. So what's great about this is that I've been doing this job for about almost 4 years, and when I started, the very first thing, so I'm flashing back to 2012. And if you were here, you might remember that the MBTA had a $160+ million deficit. A lot of it was strangulated by big dig, debt, and funding. It was just really horrible funding. And so they approved a 23% fare hike. And they also cut a little service. But one of the things here is that we created basically a meme with one of our groups, the T-Riders Union, which is out of Alternatives for Community and the Environment, ACE. Everybody heard of ACE? Yeah. And so this is sort of an example. So I think what's really important here is that instead of responding to the MBTA and their fare increase, True, some OTM members, some other groups around the table, including Mass Senior Action, Neighbors to Neighbor, we decided that we wanted to actually change the frame and change the narrative. And so what we came up with were five ideas to actually increase revenue into the MBTA. We saw this as an issue that the MBTA didn't have positive revenues. So we wanted to create these sort of revenues. And one of them, of course, was UPass Hero. And we, at that time in 2012, had speculated it would be about 60 million that this might bring in. I also want to mention that Kalita Smalls, she's an outstanding person if you get to know her. So she's the UPass woman. So this is straight from the T-Riders Union social media from Thursday. There was lots of blogging, lots of celebration around that sort of pilot. The University's Pass has been working in Chicago, Milwaukee, San Francisco, and elsewhere for years. Having here in Boston with more college students per capita than anywhere else was for a long time just a dream. In 2012, the dream became a superhero, then a campaign, and now it's an MBTA fare policy. So it's a real example of when you actually use storytelling and a real meme to change the narrative and change the frame, that it can actually yield some really positive results. So what is University Pass going to do? And here's what OTM sort of believes it can do, basically. It's been offered as a pilot with the 2015 UPass for a reason. So we wanted to be really strategic about this, and we really believe that with the University Pass, it can be a real investment to actually fund something very visionary and pioneering like a youth pass. We feel like the youth and the seniors are our most vulnerable populations for transit, and it's so important to actually make sure we incentivize transit for them. So right now, the MBTA did a study group. I was part of a working group along with MassPer, Coalition for a Livable Future, which was, that's Portland, then I'm chanting shit. Conservation Law Foundation, sorry, it happens. Conservation Law Foundation, and it was convened by the Green Justice Coalition. And so the new study is, it's looking like it'll bring possibly $40 million in revenue. I don't want to really stroke the numbers here real hard. If you want to do that, go to the MBTA website. But I think it's important, again, that we're really looking at this, and I'll hit the last line here. It's a positive investment in youth, future ridership, and a 21st century transit system. Again, Boston's got more colleges than anywhere. We've got more youth. It's a real upstream sort of policy that really invests in youth, that really invests in ridership. And I think it's this kind of policy that we really need to look at in Boston right now. It's a tough time. There's lots of really terrible things going on. We just got indexing kicked in the last election. We've got a new administration coming in that's already talked about really changing a lot of the MBTA. This is an example of where we really need to really focus on policies like this and think about how this will change basically Boston and its ridership for 2015 and beyond. And that's it, thanks.
So up next is our fifth speaker, followed by a short intermission. Next we have Matt George, who's the CEO of Bridge, again, one of our other sponsors of this evening. Bridge, as I mentioned before, is the world's first smart mass transit system. It uses big data and network optimization to develop direct transit routes within a city to cut trip times. A fun fact, while in college, Matt worked as a critical care paramedic and served at the White House under President Obama as a White House intern. So without further ado, Matt George is talking about From A to B.
Cool, thank you. There was a moment of panic. I snuck out to go get a beer, and you two were like looking around. Shocked. Oh, it actually works. Wonderful. So my name is Matt. Who knows what we do at Bridge, just by show of hands, just so we know where we're starting? Oh. Who disapproves of what we do at Bridge? Seriously, raise your hand. Oh, okay, well, there's more of you than are raising their hand, and that's fine, right? And I want this to be an introduction to an open conversation, and my Twitter handle, I have no followers, so anybody who tweets at me, it's great. It's just Matthew SP George. So if you want to angrily tweet at me, go for it. So really what I want to point out is that if you take the average person right now in the world, for the first time in human history, that person is living in a city. It's never happened before in human history that over half the world's population is living in cities. And a really big part of living in cities is being able to access some core services, like schools, jobs, and other community organizations, like banks and healthcare. So we have more than half the world's citizens living in cities, and they still need to be able to access those same basic healthcare, jobs, and other community organizations. But if people are living in cities, it's very, very, very hard to live in a city and to have a car. Who's a resident of Brookline here? Who's a resident of Brookline with a car? See? It's very, very, very hard to live in a city with a car. And it's really unaffordable to live in a city with a car. And just to even drive this point home further, I want to tell you about sort of the economic impact that sort of our friends from the city of Boston have highlighted of not being able to have a car in a city. So if you take the average American in the average American city, and by the way, Boston is completely average with the national statistic. This isn't our number, this is the Brookings Institution. They can only access, oh geez, there we go. They can only access about 30% of the jobs that they're qualified for via 90 minutes on public transportation. If you're interested in accessing the numbers, just type Brookings Institution Transit Access Survey. So we're saying to our citizens here in Boston, you cannot access 70% of the jobs that you're qualified for via 90 minutes on public transportation if you don't have a car. That's huge. That's huge, huge, huge. Boo, absolutely boo, right? So, but at the end of the day, it's really all about getting people from point A to point B. When we provide transit, we're providing transit for people to access things that they desperately need to access. The only thing that people access every day with consistency is their job. So I just want to sort of point out something. Seems like I'm picking on the T, but I'm not picking on the T. But this happens all over the country and all over the world. This is the Park Street Station in 1905. Somebody has corrected me and said 1907. I haven't been able to verify that. And this is it now. We've been providing transportation in the same way that we've always provided transportation for the past 100 years, which is not a bad thing. And in Boston, we provide transportation way better than most other cities in America. But it still really hasn't changed, even though our city has changed so drastically, and the need for transportation and the need for efficient city transportation has never been more prevalent. So I'm going to caveat this by saying part of this is Photoshopped, however, the point remains the same, and I'm going to click through without commentary. Wait for it. Alright, that part's Photoshop. So, I'm so disappointed when I learned that. So we said, okay, well, people need to be able to move throughout a city, and we now have the technology to be able to move people way more effectively throughout the city. Thus, we had sort of the stupid idea and sort of the naive idea of how do we create, instead of shotgun mass transportation, which is big bus, lots of people, set route, and turn it into sniper shot mass transportation using small buses and the principles of bus rapid transit. So historically in a city, we've always taken one person and brought them to a single destination with a car, or we've done an in-series pickup with in-series drop-offs, which is typical mass transportation, which is great and tremendously effective, especially if you use some of the things that are deployed all around the world, like Transmilenio and Bogota and other effective bus rapid transit systems. But what we do is we aggregate users at a single point based on mobile technology. So you go into our app and you say, I'm here, I need to go there, and based on everybody else that has a similar origin destination preference, we are aggregating and creating a pop-up mass transit stop. If you're within our service area in Boston, we are able to get you every 10 minutes in under a 6-minute walk for most areas of Brookline, downtown Boston, and Cambridge below the red line. So really what we're able to do is offer something in between a bus and a car. So the transit is extremely cost efficient, it's very cheap, but extremely time inefficient because it's transit and it's a bus. And a car is extremely cost inefficient, very expensive, and time efficient. So Bridge, we're able to offer the same trip, the same origin destination point, about 15% slower than a car, but on average in a city like Boston, I'm going to keep rolling through, 53% quicker than our cohort trips. So we take our customers and we say, how long is it taking you to get from point A to point B using traditional mass transportation, and how long is it taking you now? And that time is weighted extraordinarily by some of our cross-river commuters, but it's still a really significant time savings. Our customers who are in Coolidge Corner going to Kendall are saving about an hour a day round trip that they're able to spend with their families and they're able to spend in the shops. And this is the controversial bit that we debate all the time. But if you look at the total unsubsidized cost of an MBTA or any transit agency trip in the United States, it tends to be north of $9. The current figure in Boston is $11.30 if you look at all the capital costs. We're providing service at $5, which is significantly more than a T ticket, but is completely unsubsidized. So we think that at least at the end of the day, what we are trying to do is at least rethink the way that we're providing mass transit. And that's not something that happens in a vacuum. That's not something that happens with us doing it alone. So one of the things that we're so excited to be able to do is work with folks like Dan Cohen, Mayor Walsh, and folks all throughout Boston, Cambridge, and Brookline to be able to continue the conversation about how we can provide a vital service like mass transportation in the 21st century. And here in Boston, we have the most technical talent when it comes to solving this problem, and there's absolutely no reason that the city of Boston should not be the world leader in defining what it means to live in a 22nd century city, and we're really excited to contribute a small piece of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. So I hope this has really gotten your mind going and lots of questions and hearing lots of different topics. That formally concludes Act 1. We're going to be taking an intermission, so please get up, stretch, help yourself to more drinks. There's going to be a musical performance in here by Betty and the True Wheels. If you're at Bike for Life, they also played at the barbecue this September. And it's just another chance for people to mix and mingle. Please introduce yourself to someone new. I also encourage people, we don't want to also be having this conversation in our own vacuum in this room. We are live tweeting this at hashtag 10in1 StreetTalk, and so if during the break you are keen to getting on social media, I encourage you to do so and spread the word and take a picture and share with others what you're hearing. And then for a little sneak peek after the break, you're going to hear about making trucks safer. Very interesting. It was actually a talk that was given 2 years ago, and this is a whole update about what's been going on. You're going to hear about better blocks, the Department of Play, the lowdown on question 1, and a big update on our Commonwealth Avenue campaign. So please enjoy the intermission, and we'll see you back here shortly.
Where's the person you want to give all these to?
So back to the program and Act 2. To kick it off is Alex Epstein. It's an interesting presentation because he presented 2 years ago at 10in1 StreetTalk, and he's back tonight to talk on the same topic, but with new information and kind of what's happening. Dr. Alex Epstein is a technical consultant at the Volpe Center who supports federal, state, local governments in the areas of energy, climate change, multimodal safety, and data technology and policy. Alex's presentation today stems from his role advising the City of New York's truck safety initiatives as part of Vision Zero, and from advising Boston's truck sideguard pilot and historic ordinance. He spoke on this topic 2 years ago and is back tonight. Fun fact, his favorite days are sunny with tailwinds both ways on his 2-mile bike commute. Me too. His presentation is Making Trucks Safer 2 years later. So welcome, Alex.
Thank you. Hopefully this is audible. All right. This is Act 2, and I'm excited to see everyone made it back from intermission. So, first of all, I do want to thank, this is not the work of one person, despite what it says on there. This is a work in collaboration with the City of Boston, the City of New York. Volpe Center gave me the seed funding to actually pursue this work. And actually the Cambridge City Councils and Boston City Councils were very important in getting this work done. So including Kris Carter here in the audience with Office of New Urban Mechanics. So 2 years ago, I spoke at Livable Streets and proposed an idea to save the lives of pedestrians and bicyclists while also saving fuel for truck operators who are very conscious about their cost of fuel. So potentially a no-brainer. This was the, you all remember those cramped 10-in-1 talks? Definitely an upgrade. So the idea began with the established fact, we know that aerodynamic technologies for trucks can significantly reduce fuel consumption. That's what these side skirts are. Now, we apply that, this was the untapped potential that I pointed out, is they can also function as not necessarily aerodynamic side guards that are intended to prevent this kind of carnage when a person on a bicycle or on foot collides with a truck. And this kind of unfortunate fatal crash occurs about 110 times a year in the US, so quite a few people. And what we propose is not just use the aerodynamic technology that's already been used for tractor trailers, but let's look at also these single unit trucks. Let's try to outfit those. And furthermore, let's piggyback on international standards that have been around for almost 30 years that we could perhaps import here, just as we have bike sharing and other great European imports. And actually, you could call it a Brazilian import because there they care about protecting the lives of motorcyclists as well. So, where has this gone? It's actually gone in a lot of interesting directions where I didn't expect. I thought initially this would get traction at the federal level. Well, I was naive. So we started actually at that Livable Streets event. I believe Kris Carter was in the audience and caught wind of this. And 6 months later, we were involved in the largest pilot program in the U.S. 19 trucks were being outfitted with these side guards in Boston. And within by the end of that year, all the neighboring communities were following suit, Cambridge, Somerville, Newton, and actually private companies too, like Save That Stuff. Following year, also Cambridge came on board. So then I decided, well, let's take this discussion back to the federal level. Let's see, maybe this kind of resurgence of local initiative is going to echo in the federal halls. Well, no, not so much. But where it did actually pick up traction in July of 2013, just 8 months after that Livable Streets talk, National Transportation Safety Board, the same agency that investigates giant fireball crashes of trains and planes, comes out with this recommendation for federally developing standards and requiring side guards for all trucks. That's uncanny. Following year, Boston is thinking about how to move ahead. They've started this pilot program. They're contemplating what's the next step when one of their first side guard equipped trucks actually collides with a Hubway rider that was actually left alive and survived. Within weeks, Mayor Walsh is, and sorry that this is overlaid here, but Mayor Walsh is demanding that all trucks in the city actually become outfitted with side guards. They engage Volpe, and this is the big opportunity. We work together to craft this first ordinance in the nation requiring side guards on trucks in the city of Boston that are owned or contracted by the city. Same time, New York City engages Volpe, and my team works with Division Zero Task Force in New York. They haven't actually implemented anything yet, but they hopefully will. And this is the roadmap that we developed with them. I had an opportunity to speak at the Division Zero Fleet Safety Forum that was held for the first time in October this year. And actually, finally, the feds are taking notice. Believe it or not, they invited a presentation at the DOT-wide Safety Council on this topic, so it's finally starting to reverberate down in DC. And by the way, National Transportation Safety Board followed up. Another recommendation this time for tractor trailers. Tractor trailers should be installing side yards, they say. So where are we going after this in 2015 and beyond? The picture, I think, is a wider horizon, not just looking at side yards or perhaps their cousins, the wheel guards that can be installed in buses. And if you ever go to DC or Chicago or LA or San Francisco, you'll see those installed on buses. That's all crash mitigation. That's your last line of defense if you're involved in one of these horrific crashes. What if you can also focus on preventing those crashes in the first place? Crash prevention. There's a wide world of possibilities there. These are just a couple of examples involving sensors, strobe lights, or additional mirrors to mitigate the blind spots that drivers have in these large vehicles. And finally, figuring out what works through an evaluation process and not just going with one-off initiatives, but really making it a continuous improvement process. Beyond that, I expect that at Volpe we'll be working more with local partners, with New York City, with Boston. We actually got one of their first side guard equipped trucks out there to Volpe in October, which is tremendous. Tried out some new lens and mirror technologies. We're going to be working on a voluntary adoption program based on the model in London. Hopefully we'll be seeing that in New York in the next couple of years. And yes, again, the feds might actually be paying attention because NHTSA is saying they will consider and decide at some unspecified future time on side yards. All right, and that is it. I'll pause. I don't think we're taking any questions now, but feel free to accost me later, and I'm happy to talk about it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So next up, we have Josh Ostroff, who is the Outreach Director for Transportation for Massachusetts. It's a statewide coalition of now over 41 member organizations working to improve transportation across the state. LivableStreets is also a member of this coalition. Josh is also the chair of the Natick Board of Selectmen and was first elected to that board in 2006. He is also a board member and past president of the Massachusetts Municipal Association. And a fun fact, two, one, he's a Fall River native, and two, when he first moved to the Boston area, the Red Line cars were new, and he rode them all, and he rode every other transit line long before he could drive. And hopefully soon we'll have another bout of new Red Line cars coming too, perhaps. He is here to talk about One Step Back, the down low on question 1.
So you know that down low feeling when the election didn't really go your way? When you think if only we coulda, shoulda, operate this remote? Yeah, so I'm here to tell you that actually the news has just come in, and it turns out that 73% of voters said no to question 1. Unfortunately, that was just in the city of Cambridge, and the other 350 cities and towns are a little out of step. But I'm going to just give you some background on that, and thank a few people along the way, and then point to the future, because governing is really not about events, it's not about a moment in time, it's where we're going and how we get there. And so this is a lot of text, and I'll try to just summarize stuff because I know this is going to be all put out on the internet. As folks know, transportation maybe has not been as well funded as it should have been, all right? That you probably got here on streets that weren't really well designed for cyclists and pedestrians, or maybe you rode an overcrowded red line train that just barely made it across the bridge. A few years ago, the governor proposed a massive tax increase for gasoline that kind of never got further than his office. A report came out that said, well, we need another $1 billion a year of real money just to maintain the crappy system we've got, let alone to a standard that we deserve. And there's been a succession of MBTA funding crises over the years with threatened service cuts and fare increases, and that was really how our coalition was born. So there's been a gradual recognition that this was a real issue. It was punctuated by a few reports like 2007, this bipartisan commission came up with the $1 billion figure that I mentioned. In 2009, we did some reform, because reform before revenue is one of the mantras in Massachusetts. And then our coalition presented a report a few years ago called Maxed Out, which basically says that we cannot sustain this. That kind of came into, conflicted with this game that's played in the State House called You're Not the Boss of Me. You can't tell me what to do, because a lot of it in governing is not so much about what you think, but who's in charge. So leaders in Massachusetts generally agreed that this was an issue that needed to be addressed, but maybe not so much on what the solution or the details would be. And when the governor proposed a couple of years ago, next month, a $2 billion plan to resolve transportation and early childhood education, the legislature said, we were never consulted. So that had to get fixed in a difficult way. There was a big feud over the scope of the plan. The House proposed one solution, the Senate improved it. Our coalition played a vital role, and I just want to acknowledge On the Move and individual members of MAPC and Livable Streets. You know, as a government agency, the RPAs, regional planning agencies, don't take official positions, but many of them are great citizens, and we respect all the work they've done, as well as other folks that are here tonight. Institute for Human-Centered Design, advocating for the rights of people with disabilities, is another great member of our group. So there's individual peoples and coalitions came and worked in the State House to educate and inform and really be an authoritative voice for what had to be done to fix transportation. But it really wasn't fixed in a collegial way. Actually, the governor vetoed the legislature's package because it didn't do enough, and it was passed over his veto. So what's in that legislation, which is really a landmark because it's the first time in decades that we actually raised real revenue for transportation, a 3-cent increase in the gas tax. Future taxes, which I'll talk about in a moment, would be indexed to the rate of inflation. Own source revenue, which means that the transportation agencies need to raise their own money through modest fare increases, toll increases, registry increases, and just the fact that the toll fares only go up by 5% every couple of years was actually a victory for the coalition. The tech tax, you may have read about that, was quickly reversed from political pressure. The cigarette tax was increased as well, which maybe doesn't affect too many people in this room. We also had a number of accountability measures. Project Selection Advisory Council is kind of wonky speak for we're going to apply objective measures to how we make transportation investments. Regional transit authorities outside the state, there's a dozen or so of them, they have to do comprehensive service assessments, which is an innovation. It means what do we actually need to do to make it easy for people to get to school, work, home, places they need to go. More accountability and more reform. Well, as I said, we're about halfway home, and the legislation raised half the money we needed. Many of us in this room may have seen it as a transportation bill. However, legislators tend to look at it as either an MBTA bailout, if you speak to many folks outside of the Boston area, or as a tax bill. You want to raise my taxes for what? So why did we want to index the gas tax? Well, because the gas tax revenue is actually flat. People don't drive as much, cars are more efficient, and the revenue that we generate from that has been stagnant for many, many years. It was last increased over 20-something years ago, and because of inflation, it lost almost half its value. Most broad-based taxes like income and sales do rise naturally with inflation, but not the gas tax because it's a flat rate. And it is dedicated to transportation. One of the accountability measures is there's something called the Commonwealth Transportation Fund, and the more I talk about that, the more likely we are to have music playing over my voice. But because of compounding, this would actually, as if by an unseen hand. So the compounding effect of inflation would have actually increased the revenue substantially over time. Many other places, in fact the entire country, are dealing with this. The federal gas tax was last raised 20 years ago, and so we've seen that it is basically led us to a national transportation crisis. One of the other hats I wear is federal transportation policy, and the Highway Trust Fund is broke, and Congress sees fit to bail it out, a few months at a time. So we kind of lurch from crisis to crisis. Now, the town of Granby is an example, maybe not a place that many of us have ever been. It's out in Western Mass, but they did an analysis that showed how, because of the increasing costs of pavement and asphalt, that's the green line, and the sort of flat aid, Chapter 90 goes to fix local roads and bridges, their pavement condition, pavement management, pavement value index, whatever, it sucks. I mean, it's gone down over time, so they're getting less bang for their buck and fewer bucks. That's why there's so many potholes in Granby. And yet, as my colleague Rose Rusk, one of our field organizers, can tell you, did Granby vote the right way on question 1, Rose, or the wrong way?
Wrong way.
Yeah, sorry. So, but that's just how it is. Because, as I said, it's a tax bill. This was a great political opportunity for people that don't like taxes in general. So they were able to get a very resonant rallying cry. I mean, it takes me a long time, it takes anyone a long time to say why we need more money for transportation. Whereas transportation without taxation, without representation, that kind of grabs you by the throat and you can't, it doesn't let go. So they got over 100,000 signatures, they got a very unpopular legislature. Oh, could I just have a couple of minutes that were not used by the other people? So this repeal was a very important organizing tool, and it really helped drive a lot of attention towards a way of thinking about government as a cost and not a benefit. So we found that they had a lot of volunteer energy, relatively little money, but it didn't really matter because they had a better message. And they really attacked a lot of our messengers with their view of that government is wasteful. That's unfortunate, but that's the reality that we tend to live in. And it was a hard thing to defend. So our coalition organized relatively early in the process. We brought together a wonderfully diverse group of business organizations, labor, chambers of commerce, public health, folks, environmentalists all across the state. It wasn't necessarily enough, even with the professional campaign management and millions of dollars of television advertising. So we really had a simple message of safety, because that was resonant with the mainstream voters that you want to persuade in a campaign. And we pointed to a lot of interesting facts, like our bridges are falling apart, many of them are deficient, substandard, unsafe, school buses and fire trucks can't go across them. We got that message out on television, social media, letters to the editor, but it didn't really matter at the end of the day, because there is this disconnect between the problem and the solution when you're talking about a lot of public policy issues. This is the front page of the Boston Herald. I probably don't need to tell you the Herald's editorial position on this issue. And there was a lot of spillover from the governor's race. While many of the Democratic candidates, including the nominee, opposed question 1, the Republican nominee supported it. And the misquote on the gas tax didn't help things either. This is kind of inside baseball. But you know what we've learned is that while the upshot was that we lost that particular battle, it's very important to understand this is just part of a continuum. That our coalition, with your support, really is poised to grow and to solve a lot of these issues that help us, will thrive in our lives and in our communities. I want to thank Livable Streets and so many of you that helped with the campaign, that we had great regional development in this area, the Berkshires, other places of the Commonwealth, and we're really focused on the big picture issue of how we get from place to place safely, affordably, minimal impact to the environment, in a way that enriches our lives. So we look at this as a work in progress. New governor, new opportunities, new ways to solve problems. Understanding reform is critical, and things do cost too much to build in this state. We need to fix them. We need to focus on the MBTA and its issues and why it costs so much to solve the basic problems. We're looking at the next coalition and the next campaign. We advocacy a couple of years ago, the grassroots effort from the last year. So we need you to get in touch with us on the web, Twitter, Facebook, in person. Thanks so much for your time and attention. And she's awesome. She has a remote.
Thank you, Josh. I'll just put in a second plug. Seriously, a lot of you have reached out over the last couple of months as we were involved in this campaign to get involved, and it's not over, a lot to be done. So if you're interested in being involved in these issues, definitely be in touch. Our next speaker is Kate Blug. She and I just met, and we were introduced to each other a couple weeks ago by one of our former board members at LivableStreets, Zach Lockram, who many of you might know, who now lives in Texas, and he said, oh, you should meet my friend Kate, and she would be really great, and you should hear about this work she's doing. And I said, how about she give a talk at StreetTalk 10in1? So I'm excited to have her here tonight. She is a co-founder of the Department of Play and a member of the Social Agency Lab, an urban theory and practice collective, and there's members from across the U.S. She works with local organizations to push the boundaries of public engagement and is a former artist in residence with the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics in Boston. A fun fact is her work addresses the urgent need for imagination and urbanism, and the work has been shown at a Museum of Art in Poland, the Boston Arts Festival, and also in Mexico City. So please welcome Kate, presenting tonight on the Department of Play, the Search for a Lost City Department.
Thanks for that introduction, and let me show you. So today I'll be telling you about the search for a lost city department, the Department of Play. So this idea was born just a few months after I moved to Boston after having lived in Los Angeles and practicing as an artist. I moved to Boston to begin studying urban planning, so I was already entering a really quite a different world. And Boston inspired quite a visceral reaction in me after LA. The city was beautiful, very traditional, very historic, but also incredibly reserved. The engagements that I saw happening in public space were quite different than what I saw in LA, and the level of public dialogue around issues of equity, race, economic disparity, and so on and so forth were much more sort of, again, reserved and holding back, I think, important points that were not being discussed. So the Department of Play was born initially of a project of mine and quickly became a research group at the MIT Center for Civic Media, where we focused on building tools for youth agency in the city. So we did a few projects together, and after finishing grad school, I went to Mexico City for a year to become a fellow. Oh no, these are old slides, so we're going to skip all that. To become a fellow and work in creating a project called Museo del Futuro, Museum of the Future. And this project really strove to use imagination and sort of a narrative fictional framework to engage people in imagining the future of Mexico City. So a friend and I created personas of time-traveling curators who were en route from 2068 to 1968, but our time machine had crashed in 2012, and we had lost all memory of our present. We had total amnesia of 2068. So we took to the streets and engaged people in helping us remember our time. And unlike projects that tried to ask people about the future that I had done before, this allowed sort of the umbilical cord of the present to be cut from the future. So people were able to jump into that future moment without trying to solve all of the impossible problems of today in order to really imagine freely and creatively. So that narrative framework really worked, and it continued to work when we engaged over 100 youth eventually, working with two centers, youth centers on the periphery of the city, really excluded and largely marginalized communities, in building a time machine. Obviously, we needed a vehicle to get back home. So we engaged these youth who built simple steel cell frameworks that would be interpreted or filled with interpretations of the youth's ideas about the past, present, and future. So we distributed the cells, and over a course of a summer, over 100 youth created the cells that were later displayed. This is a cell, for example, that you put on your head, and there's actually a soundtrack in it to navigate your journey through time. So I left at that point and came back to Mexico 2 months later, and the organizations had taken ownership over the project and dedicated a summer of workshops to thinking about the city's future. And I came back to a community event that featured dance performances, singing, and these time machine cells that really spoke the vernacular of the local community. You see the bouncy castle, the tent that they've rented, and then the time capsule or the time machine cells are in the back. So the community was having these discussions in their own way and habits and processes that had sort of entered the public discourse. So I came back to Boston really motivated. I'm going to skip over these. Again, this is an older presentation. I came back to Boston really motivated to try to see what could these narrative fictions do for engagement around getting Bostonians excited and thinking about Boston's future. So we put up a quick poll thinking about the city. We really wanted to think about the city as a whole, an entire system. We know Boston is a city of neighborhoods, and my collaborators and I had some trouble with that because we thought people really need to think about Boston as a larger ecology. a larger social and human system. And in terms of transportation, this also relates, right? So we asked this quick question: if Boston had a superpower, what would it be? And we got some funny answers, and subsequently we asked, what if the city, with a small c, had a department of play? What would that look like? What would it do? And we asked that through this poll. We asked that to friends that we had, and people were working even in areas like government. And they told us again and again about public space. They wanted public space to engage people, to help us, as it says up here, connect with their neighbors. There was a sense of alienation in Boston, and like many other cities. And people were questioning us about how do we make public space more of a civic space. So we started to think about how can we use play to do this, and created this series of temporary play zones, borrowing from play theory, which states that play takes place in a suspended time, in a suspended place. Sometimes those places are called magic circles, where you sort of reinvent the rules of the game, and people are able to take on identities and practice ways of engaging that they normally don't in everyday life. So one of our first play zones was on the corner of Tremont and Boylston in downtown Boston, the head of the theater district. We created a pop-up puppet show where we had a large white canvas and car headlights parked at the light would become the stage lighting, and we'd run out there with a screen and give people puppets to sort of play as they walked across the street. And this was engaging and fun, and people were sort of curious and cautious, but did play with us. And then our subsequent event was called Block Party. We did this in Union Square in Somerville. And this was over 100 foam blocks, and we gave the prompt to people in Union Square to help us build prototypes for the first human Martian settlements. So we had kids that were playing with it. You see this guy is building something. We had adults playing with it. And then most importantly, we had intergenerational play. So these two people don't know each other, but they're together trying to imagine what a future Martian world might look like. So we were really inspired by this work, and we're hoping that this serves as a prototype and a kind of conversation starter for future interventions, or interruptions as we call them, that will be more sort of thought-provoking and more, will take some more time to develop. So right now, and this relates to transportation, we're starting to work along the Fairmount corridor. That's a commuter rail line that has had a lot of development and a lot of speculation in the last couple of years, and the communities around this rail line, which goes through incredibly diverse neighborhoods of Boston, are excited but also incredibly nervous about displacement, potential gentrification, and not being able to benefit from the changes that are coming. So we're working now, we're learning a lot about theater and trying to figure out how do we use theater, and borrowing from the game Exquisite Corpse, the surrealist game, to engage people in a play that'll take place actually on the train that allows all of these different opinions, fears, and ideas about what might happen that is beneficial to the residents who are currently there. So we'll use the block party to kind of engage people and start the conversation, and then eventually we'll be producing this theatrical play. So what we're trying to do in addition to, or through these play zones, we're doing research on what does play do, and our kind of underlying thesis is that we're trying to move from a participatory governance to a collaborative governance. So we know participation is often incredibly well-intentioned, but we're thinking that it's not enough, because it often is the result of a framework that is still largely exclusive. It's still an imposed framework that people are invited to participate in, and we're trying to figure out how do we create these frameworks with residents and involve them from the beginning through an entire urban development process. So we've been doing some research. On the bottom right there is a photo from a weekend we spent through my other collective social agency lab working with the Astor Gates Rebuild Foundation in St. Louis, working with their youth to put together a competition entry for ideas around the former public housing site Pruitt-Igoe. So we won third place, and we created a paper based on that experience, using play to engage youth in this collaborative form of governance. So this was published in Critical Sociology, and we're trying to do more research that is not only talking about play through practice, but what is the larger kind of theory behind what we're trying to do. So Department of Play, depthofplay.com, we're new, we're excited to get involved in all the different things going on in Boston, and thank you.
Awesome, thank you. It's so important because sometimes we can get really caught up in the wonkiness and the engineering of transportation and streets and moving, but it's absolutely about thinking about streets as they are our public space, and the majority of our public space is our streets, and how do we want to use them both to get around, but to stop and to play. So thank you. And it's a great segue to our next presentation. Andrew Howard of Better Block Project, who I could have say so many things about this. Well, first I'll just introduce him. So Andrew Howard is an urban planner based in Dallas, Texas. Fun fact, I was actually born in Dallas. We can talk about that later. And is a co-founder of the Better Block Project and a principal at Team Better Block Consulting. His 14 years in transportation, land development, planning, and design have given him a valuable perspective on urban and regional challenges. As a Loeb Fellow, currently at Harvard, Howard will document better block transformations and concentrate on creating new citizens leaders to bring about organizational and cultural change in their communities. A fun fact, since its inauguration in 2010, Better Block is now being used in over 60 cities in 3 nations. And I'm very excited to hear your presentation tonight because Livable Streets, along with many people in this room, and a couple are sitting over there, were part of building the first parking day in Boston, where we transformed a parking spot in 2008, and to try to create, change our streets into spaces. And so now I'm excited to have you here tonight. So take it away.
Thanks, everybody. So I used to be what you call a paper planner, so I made lots of books. This is me probably arguing with an engineer about a 12-foot to a 10-foot lane or something like that. That was my life. I did that for like 14 years, and I was in Texas doing this, so just imagine the ulcers in my stomach from trying to talk to engineers in Texas about livable streets, okay? And then I meet this guy. This is my best friend, and now a cohort in Team Better Block, Jason Roberts. He was a rock band, he was an IT specialist, and he's just a crazy artist, and meets up with me like logical planner guy. And he's carrying around these maps talking about bringing back the streetcar in Dallas, Texas. We'd ripped them out just like everyone else had in the 50s. And we're riding our bikes around looking at these places, and he's talking about, well, we need to, just make a streetcar. And as a logical planner, I'm telling him all of the, environmental assessments, and it'll take 2 years, and we'll apply for funding, and this bastard goes home and makes a website, because he's an IT guy that says we're bringing the streetcar back, and it looks real official, it has members and like some streetcar from Eastern Europe, and he sends this to me, and I'm like, what are you doing? Like, you can't just start a transit authority website. And this comes in the newspaper like the next day. It says Oak Cliff's future could very well be tied to a trip into the past. That's what Jason Roberts and other members of the recently formed Oak Cliff Transit Authority were hoping for. There were no other members. It was Jason and me going, what are you doing? No. But it looked very official. So this was my introduction to my new life as an active planner. So we had that project going on. We still had this map, so we're looking around, and we're like, well, if we're going to get the streetcar back, well, we need a place to ride the streetcar to, right? Because our streets had started looking like this. It gotten really blown out. This is like a one-way street now, and it's the white flight, everyone leaving the city. But we saw this great building structure. We had some friends who were starting a bike shop there, the Oak Cliff Bicycle Shop. And it was actually illegal because it was zoned industrial, because the city didn't know what to do with this land anymore, because there's no parking, and you can't operate in Texas without a parking spot. So we're like, well, what's holding this place back? And what we found is what I'll call the anti-livable streets ordinances that we had in Dallas. And don't laugh, because you might have them in towns around here. Things like sidewalk flowers, awnings and arcades, street cafes, sidewalk merchandise. These were really hard to do, and in fact, you couldn't even form a crowd on the sidewalk legally. So it was like the anti-streets, right? But I found these all across America now. It's amazing. So we just said, well, how about over a weekend, let's break all those laws. Just maliciously break them. And so we did it. And we invited our council and our planners out, and we said, surprise, here's this place that looks amazing now, and we're breaking all the rules, and we're using stuff we found like hay bales, because we're in Texas, right? And that's the first bike lane in Dallas. This is April 2010. We had no bike lanes. And we're like, let's make a green bike lane and make it look like, Europe or something. And we did this all with very little money and just our friends, and we just said, well, we got this place we can walk and bike in. We had no place to walk or bike to, so we asked, what's missing? And it's always the good stuff, right? The cafes, the third places, the kids' art studios, the gift shops, and these were all pop-up shops. There was nothing there before. We just asked the neighborhood, come out and make a shop for us, and this was like an art installation of what a coffee shop would look like. And lo and behold, the city took notice. They came out and they said, we don't know why we have these ordinances, and we've slowly been repealing these ordinances in our city. And it's just been fun to like be in a place where you can have that kind of direct influence. And what we didn't find out is those people, some of those folks that tried those businesses out just for the weekend, they stayed around. And this is one that's still there, 4 years now in the making. It was just named the best place to start a revolution in Dallas. That was in April. We said, let's do it in Dallas in September because it's so hot, no one wants to go outside, and let's choose a place that has no street tree. You know, it's just the most ugly place that we can find. But it had some good bones to it. We said, we're going to use this to totally transform the way Dallas thinks about being outside in the heat. And so we used 100 trees and 60 bushes and reorientated the street overnight. And this is all volunteers doing this, right? So I'm still working at like my traffic engineering job on the day and then doing this at night. So you can only imagine painting my own crosswalks, right? You're not supposed to do that while you work at a traffic engineering firm. And we're the bike culture now, so we started hanging bikes on poles, and we made these parking spots into people places, and these trees, we borrowed these from a landscape architect in a landscape firm, and they just kept coming off this truck. And we created this place that we didn't need a rendering for. We had rendering fatigue in our part of town. We'd seen all these oh my gosh, it's gonna be so great in 2030, tired of it. Those are actual bikes in Dallas, insane. Like, people don't bike in Dallas. And it worked. We got $1 million for this project. The trees are going in right now. Like, when I go back home, I get to see the holes being dug. That fast. So, we're riding this big high at this point, and we actually got an award for the American Society of Landscape Architects for communication. Because they saw our project was like what the World's Fair did in 1894. It showed people what we're talking about, So I'm just riding this big high, and I'm talking about it at work, and they're like, you know what? You're fired. So we started Team Better Block. And I was like, I'm going to learn how to make some money doing this, And so we did. So we went and we attacked the planning process. And we said, you know what? Public meetings and talking about this, we need it faster. We want it faster in Texas. And lo and behold, actually, my first client was the city of Dallas. And they called my old boss and said, hire Andrew back. We want to have him start the Dallas Complete Streets kickoff with a better block. And so I charged him double. And we kept doing this in Dallas, and we just did it over and over on all types of projects. And now there's been 100 of them, and actually 100 now. And 200,000 attendees, 5,000 volunteers across the world have participated in Better Block, even in Tehran, Iran, which is insane. And we've tried it out as a planning process, as the public meeting in several different cities, all the way to Memphis, Tennessee, where they use this project to crowdfund a cycle track. Yeah. And in Somerville, where we talked about how to reorientate the pedestrian circulation in Union Square during the master plan there. And thanks to all the volunteers, I bet there's some here that came out for that in May 2010. So here's my rules. Show up, because if you don't, she will, and she's against everything. So we need you there. Identify the block. It's usually a really small place that starts the change. That's my block right there, and it's changed. This was in the New York Times now. When they came for the Super Bowl, they didn't talk about big things in Dallas. They talked about that little block. And so always question the rules. It's easier and more profitable to do the wrong thing. And don't be afraid to get fired over principle. I did. It's turned out great. I'm a Loeb Fellow. My gosh, how does that happen? I could have been in jail. And so here's how we get things done. Is we set a date, we blackmail ourselves. We don't know exactly what we're going to do when we get started, but we set a date and we know the right people will show up. Real quick, that streetcar, we won a Tiger grant for that. It's being built right now in Dallas. A streetcar!
Some fun facts about prior Livable Streets. He worked on sustainable development projects in Africa, Central Asia, Middle East, and has lots of stories from that prior to transportation planning. And tonight he's here to talk to us about a safer Com Ave, one of our major campaigns this year. So Jeff, take it away.
All right, a little bit of a tough act to follow, but I'll do the best I can. So I want to thank everybody for coming. It really, after 10 years, seeing how many people really care about this issue, when we started, we had to tagline our organization, Livable Streets, Rethinking Urban Transportation, because everyone thought that we were a homeless organization. Now people know what the organization is about, know the concepts, and are really digging in. So I'm going to talk about, and I set this up so I can look at this so I don't have to keep turning around. I'm going to talk about streets. Shocking. So what is Livable Streets all about? Livable Streets is all about having a vision for something, a vision for a way that we can live that's different. We're about engagement. We're not just about sitting behind a desk trying to figure out the answers. We're about getting in touch with people, with planners, with government, with citizens. And we're about action. We want to see this stuff happen. Sitting around talking about it for too long gets us very antsy. So let's take a little bit of a step back to 2006. Earlier on in our young Livable Streets life, there was a street construction project, Commonwealth Avenue, not the one that's about to be under construction, but one that's completed. And this gives you a little bit of orientation for where it is, the yellow line, right near the BU Bridge. And this is what it used to look like. And that's kind of what they had planned on putting it back when they were done. So we were going to spend how many millions of dollars to just kind of replace it. No bike lanes, no wider sidewalks, sort of what are we doing that for? So we said, look, we got some basic Photoshop skills. Why can't you put a bike lane in there? Here's what it could look like. The city at that time had no bike lanes. Well, that's not true. 3/8 of 1 mile of bike lanes. That's less than half a mile just by Northeastern University. We had done a couple things. We've done some carrots and sticks with the city. We had said as a stick, Boston Bicycling Magazine had named Boston the worst bicycling city for the 3rd time. We've worked with the editor there, that's sort of the backstory, to sort of put some political pressure on the city. But we also did some carrots. Has anyone here biked on the Hub on Wheels bike ride? Or know about Hub on Wheels bike ride? That's great. It's a great ride. We helped to form that and work with the city to do that, specifically to have a positive engagement with the city, to say this biking stuff isn't all negative activist stuff, but it's about engaging and getting people out. So we said, this is what we want. We want to have a livable street. And the city said, oh, okay, but we don't know how to design it. So that comes to the second part. Once you've convinced the city to do something, how do you design it? So one of our board members at the time, Phil Goff, who works for Alta Planning, said, well, what if I design it for you? So we designed it, gave it to the city and said, now will you build this? And by that time, there had been some energy through the mayor's office to have brought us in to help them think about how to actually become bike friendly. And they launched the Boston Bikes program. So what not a great first project for them. So there it is, the first bike lane, the first kind of real design bike lane in Boston. New York Times picks it up and says, Boston's trying to shed its reputation. And that's part of the balance that we try to do with the city. A colleague of mine here, this was supposed to be 2 turning lanes onto the BU Bridge, and we managed to get them to stop that and put in only 1 turning lane. You can see that huge chunk of land. A colleague who's actually here has named that the Jeff Memorial Pork Chop. But the idea was that we don't need to move more cars. We need to move more people. So this is kind of the summary for what we try to do. We push government to believe in this as something important. Once they've done the believing part, then they have to do the doing part, and oftentimes they don't have the technical skills to do it. So one of the benefits that Livable Streets has brought is technical experts on our board, our volunteers, and from elsewhere to provide that design best practice. And the third thing is, once government takes that risk to do something different, all of you have to support it. Because if the citizens aren't out there saying, yes, this is a good idea, government will take a step back. So those are kind of the 3 steps. So I'm going to walk through those, in essence, with a new part of ComAv, which is the yellow part on the top, which started a design process in 2012. Once again, the city said, all right, let's do that, but let's put in bike lanes, okay? The city was there for bike lanes. But at this point, things have changed. Mass DOT has put forth a mode shift goal, saying they want to triple biking, walking, and transit by the year 2030. That's some serious policy on the books that wasn't there before. We talk about trends. The trends on this section of ComAv. Car driving is going down, more people are walking, more people are biking, more people are taking transit. So we feel like there's a pretty compelling story going on here, which is we don't need to focus on the cars. We're not trying to get rid of the cars, we just don't need to focus on them, and we need to focus on these other modes. We also looked at crash data. Crash data on this stretch for bikes is horrific. And people say, some high-level people in various places that will remain unnamed, say that, oh, it's all those cyclists running the red lights. It's all those misbehaving cyclists. And if you would just stop them at the red lights and give them tickets, it would solve all our problems. Well, it turns out that if you look at the data, only less than 5% are cyclists running red lights. How about pedestrian accidents? We don't even know about pedestrian accidents in the city of Boston. Boston Globe picked this up. Most Boston pedestrian accidents go unreported. There just is a lack of information. So how are you supposed to put together safety programs if you don't have that information? We know that speeding cars kill people. This is on ComAv. It says you have these cars that are going fast with a lot of pavement, and they're going to do damage. So what did we do for this section of ComAv? Well, at this point, the world has kind of advanced a little bit. The cities around the US had gotten together and said, no, 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 those design guidelines from those engineers, no good for us, not good for the cities. We're going to get together and form our own design guidelines. So cities started with New York, Chicago, Boston is a member of this group, said, we need special design guidelines for urban areas that include these types of new bike facilities. Boston put together a complete streets guide, and through that process I was on the advisory board. It specifically says it puts pedestrians, bicyclists, and transit users on equal footing with motor vehicle drivers. Equal footing. So it's not saying get rid of the cars, it's just saying that we've been prioritizing cars for so long that we need to stop doing that. People say that the problem is the pedestrians. The pedestrians are just crossing the street willy-nilly. Radio Boston did a story about how a significant number of the pedestrian buttons in Boston don't even work. So people are kind of misbehaving, not because they want to, but because it's designed incorrectly. So Livable Streets is all about design. I found this from 1960s. This was a campaign that was pretty much launched by the car industry because so many people were getting picked off walking around by cars. The car industry said, well, we've got to call it something. Jaywalking, that's a great thing because jays are not the most savory characters in cities. So let's have a campaign saying it's the pedestrian's fault, not the car's fault. Livable Streets is about design. If we design things correctly. So what do we want for this section of ComAv? We want the best kind of design. Raised crosswalks at the intersections, prioritize pedestrians. We want transit that goes faster than walking. We want transit that goes faster than driving. We want transit that can get through an intersection faster than a car. And then for the bike lanes. Now, I know we fought really hard for these bike lanes, but they're really not good enough. Why aren't they good enough? They're not good enough because only a small percentage of people, 7%, are willing to bike in the street. The rest of the 60% of people would be willing to bike if they had someplace safe to bike. So, in comes protected bike lanes. It's something that you've heard about, something we've been talking about a lot of. And it's not just happening here in Boston, it's happening all across the US. Every single dot on this map are places where protected bike lanes are being installed. So at this point, Boston is sort of, we want to make sure that Boston's keeping up with things, and it really helps with safety. When protected bike lanes are installed in New York, injury crashes drop by 40%. So design is really going to help solve some of these safety problems. Boston's Bikes program has a bike plan that specifically has this stretch of ComAv designated for protected bike lanes. So this is a little bit more of the image of what we're trying to go for this section of ComAv. So now that we've got what we want, how do we do it? We play music. We hit the streets. We have a series of ambassadors that go out and collect thousands of signatures from people saying, we want a better ComAv. And how many people here had signed the petition? Great. All right. We also build coalitions. We can't do this alone. It's not just it used to be that the bike people were over here and the pedestrian people were over here and the transit people were over here. No, they all have to come together and speak with one voice. We also use the media. I teach a class in the Netherlands, co-teach a class with a professor at Northeastern every summer, and we managed to get a Globe reporter to come for 10 days and write a story about separated bike lanes to try to get the word out to the general public. So media is a really important way of doing that. So that brings us to where we are today. We had a meeting sponsored by BU Bikes last week, which was torrential rain, but had over 150 people there to empower the students to say, this is our campus, and we want a livable street through our campus. The Commissioner of Transportation was there and said that the City of Boston will look into the option of a separated bike lane and these other pedestrian and transit improvements. So. Those changes are committed to. We have to work for the next couple months to make sure that that happens. But we have made progress. Why am I in it? I'm in it because I want my kid to be able to bike around, and I want to be able to bike around with my kid and not focus so much on the biking part, but focus on enjoying myself. And that's sort of one of the differences between the experience in the Netherlands and the experience here, is I feel perfectly safe on the streets biking with my kids, but I don't enjoy it as much as I would if I didn't have to think about the cars. So, Livable Streets is all about taking these ideas, pulling them together, engaging people like you, and trying to make the world a better place for all of us to live. So thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for coming tonight. In conclusion, a street is a terrible thing to waste. We heard amazing stories and ideas for what our streets can be, so I encourage you to stick around, meet people, continue the conversation here, elsewhere, and continue after this evening as well. 3 final announcements. 1, you have your question card handed to Alice on your way out. Now that you've had all these things, what is your question about getting around Boston in the future? Get involved. If you're not a member, grab one of our membership cards on your way out. And finally, thank you.